Here's an example of how we can exchange IPv6 BGP routes over an IPv4 TCP session. Our router on the left-hand side is going to be forming a neighbor adjacency with the router on the right-hand side. And the router on the right-hand side, its IP address is 192.0.2.2, and it's in Remote Autonomous System 65002. This we are familiar with from our lengthy BGP discussion we've had. However, if you look down below, we have two different address families, an address family for IPv4 unicast and an address family for IPv6 unicast. In the IPv4 unicast address family, we're specifying the network that we want to advertise over to our neighbor in Remote Autonomous System 65002. So these would be IPv4 related networks. However, if you look down below at the address family for IPv6, we are activating a neighborship for the IPv6 address family with the neighbor at 192.0.2.2. So if you go back to the neighbor statement up top, we have this neighbor in the Remote Autonomous System of 65002, but for the IPv6 address family, we're stating we want to form a TCP session with this particular neighbor, so we're activating it. And this neighborship is being established with IPv4 addresses. So eBGP, in this case, over IPv4. That's our session. And then you can see with the network command that we are advertising the 2001 DB8:1:/48 network. So an IPv6 network over this IPv4 TCP session that was established. One thing you might notice is that network command, it's not asking for a mask. We simply just specify the prefix. But it still wants an exact match that you have in the routing table. So as before, when you learned about the network command, this has to be an address and a mask in the routing table for IPv4. Well, this has to be an address and a mask in the routing table for IPv6 in order for it to be advertised. Let's do an example whereby we can witness the formation of our IPv6 neighborships using the IPv4 TCP session and sharing that IPv6 information over the IPv4 session. So right now we are going to form a neighborship with ISP-A in BGP Autonomous System 64503. Now from an IPv4 standpoint, let's see what our current configuration is that we have. Show, run, pipe to section, router, BGP. If we look at the output that we have listed, everything's just lumped underneath router BGP 64500. There's the neighborships we have. We have neighborships with R5, R6. We have a neighborship with R3. We also have a neighborship right now with ISP-A. However, because there are no address families identified, all of this is for the IPv4 address family. So let's form a neighborship in the IPv6 address family with R4, and it's going to be a neighbor of 203.0.113.1. Now, there's already a neighbor statement there. It already identifies a remote autonomous system. So we just need to activate that neighbor underneath the IPv6 address family so we can form a neighbor adjacency. And the ISP has already done this in this case. So they're just waiting for us now to do our configuration, and we should be able to establish a neighbor adjacency with the ISP's router. So we route router BGP. It's still Autonomous System 64500. So that hasn't changed here. And now we're going to type in address family. And the address family is an IPv6 address family. But notice the different options you have. Layer 2 VPNs, NSAPs, VPN v4, VPN v6, all different options that you have. So we'll type in IPv6 address family. And then it can be a multicast address family, an MVPN, a unicast, or a VRF. If you don't specify anything and you just hit enter, it defaults to unicast automatically. So now we're in address family configuration mode for IPv6 unicast, and we're going to type in neighbor, and the neighbor was 203.0.113.1, so we'll copy and paste that, and I want to say activate. So enable the address family for this particular neighbor. Now, it seems strange that we are using an IPv4 neighbor for IPv6, but as we said, you can have that IPv4 TCP session and share IPv6 routing information over that for BGP. So I just said activate. So already we see a little bit of reset in our neighbor adjacency and looked at a difference of capability change has happened, and there our neighbor is up. So what changed? Let me show you what our router did. Do show run pipe to section router BGP. This might blow your mind here, but the router reconfigured BGP for me. Look at that. Wow, that's not what it looked like before. It's separated out the address families for me now. It's saying address family IPv4 is here, address family IPv6 is here. These are all the neighbors that we're going to have. So the neighbor of R5, R6, R3, the ISP router. And then notice under the address families, we're activating those neighbors. That's what we're doing. We're also setting those next hop selfs, as you can see underneath the IPv4 address family. We have a route map there for autonomous system path prepending that was done. And underneath the address family IPv6 configuration, there's that neighbor statement. Neighbor 203.0.113.1, activate. Let's do some verification now. So what we'll look at is the output of show BGP. What do we want to look at? Let's just look at all address families right now. So you can see when you just type in all, it's going to give you the address family for IPv4 unicast. It'll give you the address family for IPv6 unicast, the address family for IPv4 multicast, MVPN v4 multicast. If you had VPN v4, VPN v6, you'd see information as well. But if you want to just dive in and look at specifics, so show BGP IPv6 shows you the BGP table. That's what it's doing. It's the same thing as you used to type show IP BGP for IPv4. Well, show BGP IPv6, that's your BGP table for IPv6. Likewise, if you wanted to see the version 4 BGP table, you type in, show BGP IPv4 unicast. There you go. So there's the BGP table for IPv4. And for IPv6, you should type in unicast. That's what's preferred. So show BGP IPv6 unicast for the BGP table. In addition to that, if you want to take a look at the neighbor information, you can type in show BGP IPv6 unicast summary. This output looks very, very familiar, but it's specific for IPv6 unicast. And you can see down here that we do have our neighborship 203.0.113.1. So it's an IPv4 address, even though we are dealing with IPv6 in this case. BGP version 4, there's the autonomous system number of the neighbor, information changed, state, prefix, received. We received 2 prefixes. What are those 2 prefixes? Let's look at our BGP table for IPv6, and we can see that we received this particular prefix and this particular prefix.